like to welcome everyone to the special meeting of Imagine Girdwood, Wednesday, July the 31st. Main focus of tonight will just be recapping what happened at the planning and zoning and a couple of other related things. Oh, sorry, I should call the meeting to order. I'm going to call it 6:05. And let's do a quick round the room welcome.
Okay.
So can you lead this off, Holly?
Yep. We'll start with the person we'll start with a phone number. It's the last four digits are 8138. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Lisa Maurer.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, we'll do the other phone number. The last four digits are 5325.
This is Brianna Sullivan. Thank you.
Hi, Brianna. Okay, we'll go to Chase next.
Hi.
Good evening, Chase Berenson, Girdwood resident and vice chair of Imagine Girdwood.
We'll go to Kirk next.
Good evening, Kirk Castle here, Girdwood resident. Thank you.
Shannon.
Good evening, Shannon O'Brien. I am on Imagine Girdwood, but I haven't always been present. I'm a resident also.
Okay, and then lastly, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, it's Daniel McKenna Foster, Long Range Planning, just here to help and listen. Thanks.
And then I'm Holly Spoth Torres with Huddle. And I'll pass it back to you, Mike.
And I'm Mike Edgington, chair of Imagine Girdwood. It's a call for a motion to approve the agenda.
So
Rudy
moved.
Beach. Thank you. Chase, Kirk, or Shannon, I guess. Or the phone numbers. Okay, second. Would anyone like second?
This is Kirk, I'll second.
Thank you, Kirk. Unless there's any disagreement, we'll consider that passed by assent. Not hearing or seeing anything passed by assent. Thank you. Minutes approval. We do have fully up-to-date minutes, including the April 24th, which was quite a long meeting when we introduced the final version, and some of which we had as a separate, the section where Holly went through and explained how to use the comment process. We actually shared as a separate video, so that bit was easy. I could just link out to it. But otherwise, it's basically a list of all the major changes. And some discussion. And the vote to approve moving forwards.
This is Kirk,
If anyone, thank you,
this is
Kirk.
Kirk, I'll motion to move forward.
Thank you. I think technically you weren't actually at the meeting, so you probably shouldn't make that motion.
Fair enough, I'll withdraw.
Thank you. Chase was.
In Kirk's stead, I can make that motion.
Thank you very much. And I think Brianna was, but looks of it as well. So Brianna, can you second?
Brianna.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, again, unless there's dissent, we'll consider that passed. Excellent. And then the last thing is the last meeting from June. Minutes from that.
This is Brianna. I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And do I hear a second?
This is Shannon, I'll second.
Thank you. And again, unless there's any dissent, we'll consider that done. Okay, thank you. There were no general comments, so now we can move through to information reports. I didn't put in officer reports because this isn't a regular meeting, and really this is about summary of what happened at the planning and zoning meeting and what we do with that. Many of you have probably seen a summary document which we shared. I'm just going to bring that up. I think it's in the meeting packet.
It is. Do you want me to bring it up or do you want to drive?
Yeah, could you just bring that up and I'll just quickly go through it.
Mhm.
So there's an opportunity to ask any questions from this.
Oh, yeah, that was it.
So we go back to the beginning of that.
Oh, right.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly go through what the purpose of planning and zoning is, or the purpose of planning and zoning for this comprehensive plan amendment. So planning and zoning is kind of technical advisory board. Their job mostly is to make sure that when people ask for things which they're allowed to ask for but aren't guaranteed. Daniel can correct me if I misunderstand this, but my understanding is they're primarily there to be both a technical body and be representatives of the community to basically say whether entitlements are in line with code. So there's a technical aspect, but there's also kind of a, does this meet the general sense of, and should this be exceptional? And the purpose of the Planning and Zoning Board is to make those decisions in most cases, but in some cases they act purely as an advisory board and they don't necessarily make a decision, but they make a recommendation, which then goes forward to the assembly to make the final decision. So they operate in these two different ways. And they're set up really to operate in the first way when they're kind of acting as a body to make a judgment call on whether something does or doesn't meet the intent of code. And because of the way they act as kind of in this sort of semi-judicial, quasi-judicial mode, there's certain aspects of the way they operate which kind of makes it very difficult to do things like this, which are where we're trying to explain something fairly extensive in a very short period of time and trying to get through, trying to explain the nuances, etc. And because of the structure, it kind of gets a bit difficult to, it's very difficult to really have a conversation. We had a work session beforehand, but that was only an hour. And even that wasn't anywhere near long enough. So they have a difficult job to do. I understand that. But I think the thing to remember, the key thing here is the Planning and Zoning Board isn't making a decision as such as making a set of recommendations, which the Assembly then make the decision. So in many ways, the Assembly start from scratch again. They'll have the planning and zoning recommendations, but they'll also have recommendations from GBOS, individuals, possibly, they see the staff packet, planning, they see comments from other departments. So they have a bunch of information that comes in, plus the application, and they make a decision from all of that. So planning and zoning is an important part of it, but it's not gating in any way. Did I misrepresent anything there, Daniel? I mean, I probably did, but did I misrepresent anything so extremely that you want to correct me? Either Daniel's still on mute or he's so shocked he's laying on the ground waiting for someone to bring smelling salts over. Okay, I will assume then that that's close enough.
I would say that your interpretation of it is correct, Mike.
Okay, thank you. So that's kind of the context. What actually happened? Oh, okay, plane was flying over. Fine. So just to confirm, Daniel, is that a reasonable representation of the purpose of planning and zoning for this type of case?
Sorry, there was a really loud plane flying over. You were asking about the procedure of what they can approve or not?
No, what I was saying is their role here is they operate in these two modes. One is kind of quasi-judicial, where they're effectively making a decision on whether something meets the sort of intent of code, and they can vary slightly from the letter, but they're making either decisions in many entitlement cases, or they're making a recommendation for the Assembly. And the recommendation of the Assembly obviously has weight because it's the Planning and Zoning Code, but then so do community feedback, so does individual thoughts from departments and individual Assembly members and members of the public and everything else. So it's another piece of data which goes into the decision being made by the Assembly. The Assembly is not bound to follow what Planning and Zoning recommend in these cases.
No, the Assembly can do what they want. They can't.
Yeah.
The Planning and Zoning is just a recommendation. And yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
They do tend to follow it, but they don't have to.
Yeah. But it's kind of like we're starting again. I mean, we've got their opinion, but we kind of start almost from scratch with the Assembly. Almost. Okay. So The next part of the document basically just states what happened. If the planning staff recommendation had 11, or planning staff report had 11 recommended changes. We agreed with about half of them, over half of them, I think. 2 more were introduced at the meeting itself. They are detailed in the document further down. The 2 which are introduced, let's just quickly go down. If you go down a little bit further here, go up a bit. I'm looking at I think it's 4G, the mixed use.
Wait, it must be further.
No, I think it's up actually because they introduced it at the meeting.
Oh,
One more. There we a bit more. There we go.
oh.
Yeah. So
Sorry.
there was they updated one of the recommendations to just change the wording slightly, and they if you go down on the next page, they recommended a mixed density zoning in basically the area of Alyeska subdivision closest to the resort, and basically 1 block either side of Alyeska Highway. Right, and the others are the 11 things I think many of us saw that were in the staff report about a week before the meeting, which is detailed further down. So we had 1A and 1B were vegetative buffers, and a removal of vegetative buffers and removal of language around future park designation. 2B and 2C, sorry, yeah, 2A, 2B and 2C was changes from open space to mixed use in the Mitten/Forest Loop area, change from open space to low density residential in the Virgin Creek area, and an extension of the mixed use area by the squirrel cages. 2D was to remove the reserve category for the upper valley and just have it commercial recreation. I think there was a letter in the paper yesterday which was talking about open space, which isn't what we discussed at all. That's from a much earlier version when it was a draft before we approved it as Girdwood. So that's kind of very old news and arguing something that isn't in front of us.
Who wrote the
but
letter?
the-
Do you know?
Chris von Imhoff, I think he was responding to what was proposed in February, not what we approved in April. There's the change to not commercial recreation reserve, but just commercial recreation, the upper valley, and another change which reflects the land underneath the Winner Creek extension, which is in the process of being handed to Girdwood Parks and Rec. There was number 3 was the addition of some language around the hazard mitigation around the tsunami risk of Old Girdwood. 4 was honestly, I think, an improvement to a policy statement. It basically means the same thing. It's just slightly better. It's better wording. It's in a positive sense how we originally had it written. And then there were some technical edits as well. And one change in the wording around the airport. There were 2 or 3 versions of that. Okay. So if we go back to the table, it's in our notes. So that was a quick run through all the changes that were recommended by planning, both beforehand in the staff packet and in the meeting itself. So 3 of these recommended changes were voted down by planning and zoning, so they didn't include them as recommendations from planning and zoning. That was the change to mixed density in Alyeska Basin around Arlberg and Alyeska Highway. They also removed the recommendation to take out vegetative buffers and take out the potential future parkland. But there was a subsequent discussion between the project team, between Huddle and planning, which Huddle will tell us about in a minute. So of all the things that were left, there were 4 which which in our judgment were not in alignment with the community view. And in fact, all of these 4 things were discussed at a number of meetings and discussed in public comments in the last set of public comments on the plan. And there were 6 items which were suggested recommendations, and the project team agreed are fine recommendations and completely in line with the community view. Some of these were just corrections and updates. Some of them were improvement in language. And then the last one, number 6, technical edits, are actually edits we asked for. So of course we agreed with those. Okay, so that's kind of where we are. Next steps. I think we've seen. I'm interested in hearing from Huddle what the discussion was about vegetative buffers and potential future parkland. I suspect that the recommendations which planning suggested or current planning suggested and were not necessarily adopted by planning and zoning may well come up again in the assembly action. I think we can assume that all the things in green will be introduced into the version which is goes in front of the assembly, and then really the main substantive things are some or all of the items in kind of pale red or pale brown, I guess. Those 4 items, which are all changes to the land use map. And that's it. So the next step is this will be scheduled for the assembly, we think, in September. They'll introduce it. There will be a work session with the assembly. There will almost certainly be a work session with the assembly before it comes to public hearing. Then there'll be a public hearing. Then there'll be a decision by the assembly. Okay, any questions on that? Not seeing any questions.
Sorry, Mike, I don't see my hand to raise. This is
Okay.
Brianna. Is there any chance that anything that was voted down would make the resolution from planning and zoning?
Well, planning and zoning made the decision at their last meeting, and then they make all I've ever seen in the past is there's a formal resolution, which is really just making sure that there's a proper record of everything that happened in the meeting if there are floor amendments. And then a formal resolution gets brought to the next meeting of planning and zoning, and then they vote on that, which will be, I think, next Monday. I've never seen a case where they haven't just, it's on the consent agenda, so I haven't seen a case where it hasn't just passed as it was. So I don't think there'll be any changes. I don't expect there to be.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to jump back to the agenda. We had a couple of other things we were going to cover on this. Okay, I've covered purpose of the planning and zoning review. We've reviewed briefly the departmental recommendations. We could talk in more detail about we'll talk a little bit more detail next after this about about any response we want to make to them. Okay, yeah. Next steps. Okay. Actually, Holly, can I pass it over to you? And would you like to talk about the discussion you had with planning about the vegetative buffers and future park use or future park designation?
Yeah, so there's, in addition to just passing a resolution that gets forwarded on to the assembly, there's also this kind of middle area where the commission and staff and the community sees these areas where we can find some better ground, where there's a little bit more compromise. And so the two, or find a little bit more understanding. So the 2 areas where were the future dedicated parkland areas identified on the map and the vegetated buffer that we identified on the map. So the resolution was specific that said, the consultant will have a meeting with the planning department to talk about these things more. So we did that, and I want to share what the results of that. So I have the vegetative buffer stuff up right now, but I want to talk about the future parkland one first. Actually, let me pull up the map for that, just so that everybody can see that. So the planning department wasn't really on board with having a symbol for future dedicated parkland on the land use plan map. They thought it was confusing and maybe not the best use of the land use plan map tool. So, I think some good ground that we came to, was that we would remove this hatch here. This is future dedicated parkland. We would remove that hatch from the land use plan map. We would make it open space, so it would turn into the open space designation from the land use plan map. And then both in the implementation section and in the narrative, we would add language and a map. So a map that indicates where the community sees future parkland as a priority, as is documented at this point in time, so that when you do start that implementation action of completing a parks and open space plan, that these parcels that are identified as future parkland are a starting point. So I think everybody felt better about that and felt good about that. And so that was the solution for the future dedicated parkland item. I guess before I go any further, are there any questions about that one?
Sorry, I missed one crucial sentence. So this will be a new map in section 2.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
it'll be a new map. I actually think it'll be in the narrative of section 3. I don't think it'll be in existing conditions. I don't, actually, Mike, I
Thanks,
don't know
yeah.
yet, but
Okay.
it's more to me than just existing conditions.
Yes. It's section 3 is what I meant, sorry.
Yeah, section 3. Okay. Okay, so then moving on to the vegetative buffers, we also had, and this one is like a little bit trickier. And I do want to say before I start this that we're kind of farther along on the future dedicated parkland thing. We found a good solution. Everybody's on board. We're still working through the details of the vegetated buffer, but I want to share the thinking that we have at this point. The major concern is like, once the plan is adopted, like how to actually get it done, how to actually do this in a way that doesn't hinder open space protection or hinder development or anything, or maybe create something that is not even possible to do. So we're trying to like think toward the future on how to write an implementation action that does that. Okay, so after a discussion with the planning department, I walked away with some good ideas from the planning department and some direction, and I'm going to share with you what we've crafted. Also, there was a lot of comment on this at the Planning and Zoning Commission by people from Girdwood. So I think this one is important. Okay, so 2 things. I still think, so the planning department wanted to remove this from the map. They wanted to do that. I still don't think it should be removed from the map totally. There was some concern like, is this a parcel? Is this an easement? What is this? We don't know what this is. I would argue that it's kind of the same as having these dashed road lines on the map. Like the road isn't gonna likely end up there either. There's a lot of like engineering and site assessment work that happens to like figure out where the parcel lines go and figure out where the road's gonna go. So our recommendation is gonna end up being to change this vegetated buffer line and make it dashed. So all the way up here, all the way up here. So that it's indicating that I don't know, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a parcel. It doesn't necessarily have to be an easement. So combining a dotted line on the map with this language, we're going to look for some input from you on this, but this is where we're headed. Adding to the implementation table our 4.2, so it shows up in chapter 4 under like open space, parks and open space. This is where we had it originally here, our 4-2, just for future if you want to review that again. So here's where we're headed, or we think we're headed. Prior to platting or disposal, HLB shall establish a property easement, parcel, deed restriction, or similar through a platting action or dedication that creates a vegetative buffer to retain existing vegetation between, and then here's where things are gonna, we haven't actually done this work yet, because what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to insert language that describes, so a vegetated buffer to retain existing vegetation between, and we're gonna insert language that talks about these parcels, so these HLB parcels, this HLB parcel, this HLB parcel, and then between those parcels and then these existing subdivisions, and then these additional parcels here, which are HLB parcels. So the solution is a dotted line on a map in combination with some more specific language in the table. That kind of indicates a little bit more than what we're thinking. Like, it could be an easement, it could be a parcel, it could be a deed restriction. It's like, we don't know what it is yet, because there's nobody wanting to subdivide HLB's land to do anything on it yet. So it's hard to know what the best course of action is. So anyway, I'm going to stop there and let you talk about it, ask questions, whatever. Any comments? Oh yeah, I guess the last sentence is the same width shall apply to the whole length of the vegetative buffer.
So that does this mean the 100 feet number has disappeared?
I think, so Bree and I think that we're gonna push back and put a width in there. The planning department definitely didn't like 100 feet, but we were trying, I don't know, maybe you could help.
Yeah, so I would say yes
No, but
to 100
what's-
feet, but it's probably, you know, an average of at least 100 feet.
Yeah, I mean,
Or
I
something
was
similar
trying
to that. So it's not like an absolute parallel.
I mean, I was thinking like, how much space do two of your huge, gorgeous, beautiful trees take up? I mean, Bree and I think like 40 plus 40, 40
Yeah.
feet, 40 feet, like that's kind of where we were headed. I think the planning department was confusing. They were thinking it could be new vegetation, and we were like, no,
No, it's existing.
this is existing, like planting new trees in this. I mean, everybody loves planting trees, but the point here is preserving big old trees and a natural buffer. So I would like to, I want to, my goal is to get to a point where we have a number back in there, but we're, you know.
I agree. I think
slowly.
we agreed on 100 feet as a community, so I think it should be there or very close to that number.
Yeah.
And then I think it's fine to say it doesn't have to be exactly 100 feet at every point. I think we had at least 100 feet before, didn't we?
Yeah,
So, you know, subject to topography and on the ground conditions. I'm a little confused as to why it's becoming this specific, because there's a very large number of subdivisions you're going to have to cover. I mean, this is literally probably 30 or 40.
yeah, maybe there's an easier way
It
to.
doesn't, I think it should be a
it.
general statement. I mean, when this isn't the actual implementation, this is the guideline for what the implementation should be.
I agree with you.
So I think it's between the existing subdivision and newly developed land. It's not always going to be HLB. It may be today. It doesn't follow it will be for the next 20 years. In fact, it almost certainly will not be over the next 20 years. So I don't think HLB should be in there either.
Well,
I mean, it could be municipal land, fine with that. But HLB is a very specific beast.
Okay, between existing subdivision and newly, what did you say, newly?
Yeah, I would say the and newly platted land, newly developed land. And then since you have the dashed line on the map, there is a domain of effect already marked on the map. So that's why I don't think it shouldn't be necessary to go through and list every single pair of parcels or tracts
Yeah.
and
You know what,
subdivisions.
right, because we were talking this way before we had decided to put the dash line back on the map.
Yeah. So the dashed line gives the general domain of where of where the zones are, and then anything which is across that line follows this process. But I do like that this doesn't specify how, because how depends on what maybe the subdivision, whoever's developing a new subdivision there actually wants that as being an easement and wants that as being part of their part of their green space plan or whatever it might be.
Yep,
Maybe it's used for drainage.
yep,
It's it makes it much more sense to have that flexibility.
yep. Okay, Brianna has her hand up. Go ahead, Brianna.
Thank you. I was also going to get into what the definition of the vegetative buffer was, but I guess the rest of the statement does clarify, but I like the flexibility within the statement and I like the statement. But I also was thinking 40 feet as well, just looking out the window and looking at a native tree that's been around for a long time, but existing vegetation is helpful as well. So I was just curious about the definition.
Yeah, we did. I wonder if the definition,
Like, is that Alaska State Land Survey, is that defining it somewhere? Or is
no,
it
that's
in
just one
somewhere?
of the HLB tracks.
Got it, yeah.
Yeah. So that'll end up being less specific, I think. Okay.
So I think if a lot of the complaint or concern from planning was about how this is implemented, and that does seem still a little premature. But the general policy of there's a variety of ways it can be implemented. There should be some sense of dimension and how much it can vary from that dimension. So I don't think it's exactly the same width the whole way along.
Right.
But maybe it's average of at least 100 and no less than 60, something like that.
Right.
And then the intent would be to not have, or whatever the magic number is, maybe it's no less than 80. But I think we should keep an average of 100 feet because that's what we as a community agreed. But then you have to allow topographic reality.
I don't know. I mean, I just keep thinking 2 trees.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So this is where it's headed. It's what Bree and I have to do next is, well, we were waiting for this to talk about it, and then we will put something together and send it back to the department and see if they're on board or not. But again, it can change at the assembly again, right? So I think we should show that, I think the planning department they weren't a strong no on this. I think after the conversation, they like wrapped their minds around it a little bit more. They were more amenable to it. So I think that shows good progress. So now that said, I do think that anything that happens here is going to be, it'll be like expensive and tricky to do. Just based on the entitlements that HLB has to go through when disposing of land, so. I mean, I don't think this should be seen as a. Anyway, I don't want a developer to think, like, if they're really interested in developing market rate housing in this area, but for some reason it's too costly to do this. I don't know. That's what they're saying. I don't know if I believe it, or because it's hard to know until there's a specific proposal on the table, but just know that these sorts of things are tricky to implement. So, because your goal is more housing.
Right, but there's necessity for platting. I mean, it's not going to, that new housing is not going to occur in tract size pieces of land. So there absolutely will be a platting action. And the
Right.
cost is the platting action,
Right.
not whether you have, whether you're splitting it into, 93 or 94 parcels. That isn't the fact. That isn't the thing that matters, is that there has to be a platting action at all. And there has to be a platting action.
So the question is, who bears that cost, right?
Right. But I mean, if you're taking a tract, if a developer is taking a tract and developing 93 separate housing units on they're incurring that cost. And we're effectively adding one more to that. Now, if HLB chooses to do it, then they can, then maybe they would split it into, like what happened in Halton Hills, is they effectively they took a large tract and carved out part sections within that tract.
Mhm.
And there, I believe the cost was shared, but they also maintained a lot of the land. So, that's another model, and it's just whatever happens further down. But I don't think I think that for me, the concern would be how much potentially buildable land does this remove from buildability, and are there extra costs because, potentially you have services going an extra 100 feet.
I mean,
Big picture, it's a small delta.
Bree has done a lot of thinking about it. She thinks there's plenty of space, right? But
Yeah.
she's not drawing parcel lands for a future housing. But it feels like there's enough space, but I mean, so I think the point is that moving to a dotted line, like, it's not going to be this straight line. It's probably going to move around based on where the parcel lines end up, but anyway.
So
It's
practically,
hard telling, not knowing.
practically the next step then is you're going to suggest language that's consistent with this discussion.
Mhm.
And then either if planning's happy with it, you've got two sets of agreement. If they're not happy with it, then one or the other or both get presented to the assembly and a decision is made.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I guess that's the point. Like, if planning isn't on board, there's still the assembly, so it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. What I'd like to do now is let's go back to let's go back to some general. Are there any general comments anybody wants to make about including municipal stuff, about the conversations that happened around planning and zoning, and whether I'm interested in everyone's views on this, because I think there just wasn't enough time to explain, and there was definitely some misunderstandings. And then we'll get into these 4 specific issues. Well, I guess 5, because we can't dismiss 2G either. I'll make one comment then. One thing I think.
Shannon did raise her hand.
Sorry, Shannon, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I just didn't want to be silent, Mike, for your question. This seems like a really good solution, though. I think that, well, one, I really appreciate Huddle. I felt like you were really advocating for our community during that meeting, especially during this place. And so thank you and Brianna and Mike or whoever was working on this. It seems like really it's the same thing. It's just more descriptive so that they can understand it. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Shannon. Kirk.
Yeah, just, did you want some comment on some of their
Yeah, yeah.
other? Or?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll just go on record as saying that they certainly disregarded a whole lot of public process. So not too happy about that, but I know we have a chance with the assembly, because I think that's their strong point here. I mean, many meetings and expansive efforts went to try to get a representative view of what the community wanted for the future. And a few staff just disregarded all that. And I don't take that lightly. And I'd like to certainly look forward to the opportunity to go before the assembly and urge them to listen to the community. So there's my thoughts.
Thanks, Kirk. I'll make a comment then editorially. One thing I think would have been helpful, I don't think we have it in the plan, is how much land has been allocated to future development, even with a 100-foot buffer removed from it. I think having that, we have a number in the housing analysis saying basically 35 or so acres of commercial development, and let's say 60 if it's lowest density, 60 acres of residential. I think that may be low, maybe it's 100. But then the amount of land that's been allocated, that's been identified as developable for housing, I think is of the order of 500, 400 or 500. I have not got a number, and I'm not good at GIS, but I wonder if Bree has calculated that. I think Dave Nyman was going to as well. I don't know if he ever did.
Yeah,
But
I think we can do it. I agree with you. I think we should have maybe been more specific about that. I think we didn't because
it was obvious.
yeah, it was obvious, but I also think we realized like a lot of times when you focus on a lot of times when you focus on those numbers, it's because you have some sort of shortage. I was like mostly worried on the front end. I was worried about having enough, but then when you realize you have plenty, you're like, oh, there's plenty. And we just kind of lost focus. So, but I think you're right. So that we can illustrate how much is available for each land use type. We can do that easy.
Right. So, I mean, my rough calculation, the Mittens, we know it's 27 acres. The Virgin Creek is around 110. South Town site is less than 5. So, if you added all those in, we're going from maybe 450, 500 acres of, we currently have 300 acres of residential development. The plan identifies about another 450 to 500 acres, which is allocated to future development. And then if all of these, the no's were all, the things we've marked no here, if they were all added in, it would add about another 120, 130. So we'd be going, and the demand is probably 100. So we have a demand in the next 20 years of 100 acres, maybe 130 acres if you include commercial. We've identified 500 or so, and the argument here is whether we identify another 130. So we've identified, crudely 5 times more than we need. Should it be 6 times more than we need? Now, there is obviously a more subtle argument about where they are, and that's something I know there's definitely, there'll definitely be more formal. I think there'll be more formal action, let's say, on trying to get a plan together for extending water, for example, across the whole of the valley. But the general principle of just the more land you allocate towards housing, the better, I think is a very simple argument and therefore very attractive, but not necessarily a true argument.
Okay, let's go over to Shannon again. Go ahead, Shannon.
Hi, I just had a question. So Mike, when you're saying those numbers, are you also including the Holton Hills development in those numbers? Because
No.
I think we should, because
Oh, actually, yes. Sorry, yes, I was.
You
I
are,
was including
okay,
Holton
okay.
Hills, but I've only done a very rough calculation. It's
Okay.
When I say 400 and somewhere between 450 and 500, it could be 600, it could be 420. I only did a very rough calculation because I don't have the data.
Yeah, I agree that it would be good to point out how many it is, because in their arguments, they didn't state a number that they felt was an adequate amount. They just said, I feel or I think. And so it seems like it would be good to be responsive and, hopefully they won't think or feel that anymore, but.
I mean,
Yeah,
my sense is the two, sorry. Holly,
I was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say, as we work toward, once we know when the workshop, work session is with the assembly, I think we're gonna lean back on that housing demand forecast and existing conditions analysis in a presentation. I think that would tell our story a little bit better. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say the housing demand analysis is, it's a piece of work we did. We've got the data behind it. We should present that forwards. The argument, again, the simple argument is the way you solve the housing problem is by building new houses. We know that's not true. We have evidence that isn't true. Chase lives in a place that proves it isn't true. So we know that if you just build more housing, you don't actually get any more community housing. You get a lot of empty houses in Girdwood. Something like recent past, 85% of them are empty. So that isn't the solution without the other pieces. And the other thing is the demand is significantly lower. The demand we have over the next 20 years is significantly lower than the land we've already allocated. Allocating more is just, is to no particular benefit. The other thing I was going to say, changing topic slightly, is I think the 2G example of changing from low to mixed density, I feel I understand why, and again, the argument there is that will produce more housing, but that isn't actually what low and mixed density means. It's about footprint. So if you want to build 6,000 square foot McMansions or 8,000 square foot McMansions, you would do it in mixed density. If you want to build smallish 4-6plexes, you can do that in low density, because it isn't actually about density at all. And we kind of fell into a trap of using the term density when we don't actually mean density. So I think one thing it might be too difficult to do because it would be such a big change, but one thing I would strongly recommend is if we had a different word other than density, because it makes people think, it makes, everyone who hasn't studied it or thought about this for hundreds or thousands of hours just jumps to the wrong conclusion immediately. And I did think a little bit about it and bounced some ideas to Holly, and she was very silent afterwards. They must have been terrible.
No, I just,
That's fine. I know you've got plenty of other things to do.
no, it's Bree spends 100,000 hours thinking about that stuff. I think I think she has some ideas about it too.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think we can.
So it's just an observation that there's probably a better way. And again, when we come to actually explaining this in front of the assembly, we can probably come up with a specific example. But density makes people think about housing unit density, which is not at all what this aims at.
Go ahead, Brianna.
Thank you. I'm going to jump back to the previous item about the developable land. And I wanted to share that during Barb Cruz's testimony, I felt that the way she delivered the percentages was a good way to do it too. So I don't know what hers are. I cannot regurgitate them right now, but if that was a way to also state the share of developable land, or also in there, the amount of land that you cannot develop on because it's wetlands, but then parts and pockets of it are. And that gets into the weeds, but it's pretty relevant when someone who hasn't been here or doesn't live here doesn't realize the forest.
Barb did share her testimony with us, so I have it. I can dig into it.
Okay. What I'd like to do now is just make sure if there's any other. We've kind of covered some general points and we covered some specific points. Is there anything else about the those four kind of beigey colored items that people have strong? Maybe that. I mean, my opinion, I have a stronger no for some than for others. I don't know if anyone else has similar thoughts. Are there any in there that would be nice to have but aren't mandatory? And I think in all cases the community fell into would have had a discussion about the options, including the option that planning eventually recommended, and came up with a no. So I think we have already had that as a community. We've already had that discussion as a community. I'm comfortable with the conclusion we reached here. I'm just wondering if anybody has additional thoughts now. Crystal.
I just wanted to say the change South Town Site area number 3 to mixed use. For the GC5 lot in particular, I would be in support of it going to mixed use. I had advocated it previously to go to mixed use because I had confirmed already that if it was mixed use, it could also be used as park. So with the because that is the only developable section, it makes sense to have some flexibility there. Yeah.
Steve, we already had it as mixed use, right? So I still think there's a little confusion
Yes.
around this one. I think the planning department was advocating for,
All of it, but they just didn't realize that it's really not usable.
I'm not sure. And I think honestly, I think they might have misinterpreted HLB's comments. Because HLB just wanted to make sure that this was consistent with the South Town Site plan. And it is, as presented here. There might be like a little shift that needs to happen around here, but I don't know. So I don't know, we're not on board with making that whole parcel mixed use, that's for sure. Let's
The
go.
way I understood it from the meeting is that the current planning position was that everything which was not in the 100-year floodplain or the 1% floodplain should be mixed use. And the recommendation Bree took from watershed management was because of the nature of the creeks and the rivers being a alluvial floodplain. That is not a good idea. And what you should do is have everywhere outside the 0.2%, rather the area between 0.2 and 1%, so the 500-year floodplain effectively, shouldn't be developed according to watershed management and should be developed according to should be marked as mixed use according to the current planning recommendations. So that's kind of a disagreement within two municipal departments.
Yeah,
And
So it's
then
exactly
on
where you
top
draw the boundary.
and then I I don't have any problem with 6-134 being mixed use because then it would allow for the opportunity for the future RV park. So that one to me it's GC5 or so that 6-076 parcel, but none of the rest is usable in my opinion, therefore should be open space, but those two should be mixed use.
And they are, I believe.
So and then I apologize for coming on late, but was there any update in regards to planning working with Holly for the vegetative buffer issue?
yeah,
Yes,
you're gonna have to watch the video.
Okay, it's a
which will be
lot.
up in the next day or two.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a fair compromise. There's a reasonable compromise, but there might still be a difference in detail. I think, Holly, you may have moved a window across the
Oh,
map.
sorry,
That's
you're
fine.
getting weird news.
Yeah.
Does everybody else get that? They just think they know who you are and what news you want, and it's just, anyway, whatever. Sorry,
That's fine. Okay.
but if you saw any gold medal updates, don't tell me, because I don't want to know yet. It's just urging me to click on all that. Okay, go on.
Okay. I'm gonna rant for about 15 seconds. There was I would go back to the argument that there was an argument made that the comprehensive plan must be consistent with all previous plans, including recent ones which were explicitly ignored the comprehensive plan coming in favor of one from 1995. So that's a rather nonsensical argument, but
So-
I'm sure will be repeated.
Yeah, and I want to say though that there's so to me, and there's like no. To me, that's an indication that they don't review, the Planning and Zoning Commission don't review and approve comprehensive plans like this very often, or review and recommend. So I think in that case, they were like kind of treating it like an entitlement.
Yes,
Because when you
exactly.
review and approve an entitlement, it has to be part of an existing plan or document, right? So that comment to me is just maybe indicative of the work that they typically do.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's part in that, you know, they're set up in a way to deal with those entitlements in the quasi-judicial model, even when they're not doing that.
Right.
And that gets in the way of productive conversation. Yeah, I think this is the second one they've done since 2012.
Yeah.
I believe the 2040 land use plan update was. Now there's district plans have done since then.
I mean, district
Okay.
plans are similar, I would say, but not.
But if it's a district plan, the Anchorage Bowl is under an existing comprehensive plan, then there's at least a discussion that you have to have of either if it differs, then it also requires modification to the comprehensive plan.
Right.
But so this would be analogous, you know, this is analogous to the to replacing the comprehensive plan in the bowl.
Right.
Okay. If there are no other comments on those 4 specific cases, then I think we can move on to our next item, which is, oh yes. So next thing is just budget. So I think we've moved on from planning and zoning now, unless anybody else wants to make comment on that.
We have one hand up. It's
right.
likely Deb, I think.
Sorry.
It is. Hey, are you saying we could only comment? Were you looking for comments just on the 4 that they're in disagreement?
No, anything else. I mean, you can comment on anything, but we were focusing on those 4 because I thought that's where we'd get most comments, and plus the other ones that planning and zoning was recommended and was rejected by planning and zoning, or at least voted down by planning and zoning.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sure everybody knows how I feel about the forest loop going to mixed use, so I'll go over that one. But I was just wondering if they gave any language for airport development when they were asking to adjust the language about the property, and I don't see any reasoning behind that. Was there any given that wasn't that was included somewhere
I think
else?
that started as a misunderstanding, I think. Because the original proposal was talking about the plan should be talking about areas outside of the state-owned land, and that isn't what we were talking about.
Right.
So is it going to be removed? There's no point moving forward if it's not applicable to Girdwood.
I don't understand your question, Deb.
I don't know what, okay, I guess I don't understand. So you're saying that the language is because it's clearing up a misunderstanding?
No, the original proposal from the planning department, I believe, was a misunderstanding of the language in our plan, in our proposed plan. Okay. They were addressing something we were not discussing. They were talking about, they were recommending that we clarify the language so it's clear we are talking about land outside of the DOT. So we're talking about use outside of the DOT owned land. We were not. We were talking about use within the Girdwood area zone, which is the DOT land. So there was initially a misunderstanding, and then we settled on a slight change of language, which honestly doesn't seem significantly different to me, which both parties seem comfortable with. But it's a very, very slight change in language, and I don't think it really makes any substantive difference to what we had before.
I just don't understand the reason to change it.
I mean, I agree. That was my statement at the time. I don't think it needs to be changed, but I don't think it changes it in a way that matters.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Any other comments on the items? I mean, you know, there could be a whole bunch of other things appear when we get to the assembly action. We had 2 more come from planning at the planning and zoning meeting. Maybe we'll get 2 more surprises. And it depends what Daniel has up his sleeve. Okay, right. We're gonna move on to budget. So we've kind of gone a bit further than we intended to in terms of the budget. We've used because there was an extra step we ended up having an extra step of public comment between the first round and second round of draft maps. We've had more meetings than intended. There's more work now because of substantial changes from Planning and Zoning Commission. So we're going to end up going over the contract by a number which is still not quite written in blood, but is going to be the order of probably around $4,000. Now we're already projecting a small surplus at about half of that. So what I'm going to propose is that we sort of set a target of over the next couple of months try and raise about $3,000, so we guarantee we have enough money to pay for the work Huddle is doing. Huddle have said they may have some flexibility about when they get paid, which is extremely kind of them, because I think they want to see the end of this project as much as we do. But I think I'm gonna recommend that we start a fundraising activity with the goal of for raising $3,000 to finish off this work and make sure we can pay for the work that's being done to finish it off, rather. If anyone has any thoughts on that, I'll like to discuss it and then maybe have a motion. Chase.
I'm just curious if we could clarify what fundraising means in this context. Is that going out for grants? Is that holding bake sales? Is it everything in between?
Bake sales and asking for donations.
All right.
There are people, you know, if we had 900 people have been involved in the plan roughly. So if every one of these gave us $5, we would solve it. They will not. But you know, I think it's a relatively achievable. Well, actually, not even $5, is it? It's $3. This is kind of an achievable, given what we've spent so far. I think it's a fairly achievable goal. But it'd be primarily through donations, through individual donations, I think. And then we can do a bake sale. We could see if we can get a sort of evening at the brewery or something.
Yeah,
Very happy to receive ideas about how we can do this, but I'm just trying to set a sort of a general target.
And just so everybody knows, like I haven't talked to Shanna about this, but so I'm not going to speak for Shanna, but Huddle is committed. We're doing the work. I think what we're saying is, can we have some time for our participation in the meetings? Have some funds for our participation in the meetings. I'm not asking for money to cover the work time, because I feel like that's included within the scope of work that we've already agreed on. It's the additional meeting time that's just a little bit hard to absorb all the time. So.
And we may not end up needing all of that, but we probably will end up needing most of it.
Right.
What we don't want to do is stop at this point, obviously, or lose Huddle.
No,
I know then we're not going to, but we want to make sure that there's no, we can still use them again in the future. Okay, just so it's sort of in our formal action, would somebody like to make a motion to set a target of $3,000 additional fundraising beyond our current balances, so we could to pay for the additional costs of this last phase of the project. Kirk.
Yeah, I will make that motion. I think it's important to have their professional representation through all the meetings. I think that's a reasonable sum to be able to raise. And so I make the motion to have that $3,000 as target to raise for those purposes.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to second it?
I can second that.
Thank you, Chase. Any further discussion? How we do it is going to be a later discussion, but we just need to set a number first. Okay, no further discussion. So, Holly, can you just do a roll call vote?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll start with Deb.
Yes.
We'll go to Brianna next.
Yes.
Chase,
Yes.
Kirk,
Yes.
Shannon,
Yes.
Terry, Mike.
Yes.
Okay, Terry, last chance, or you can put it in the chat. And did I get everybody? I did. Okay, a yes from Terry. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Girdwood.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks, Daniel. Daniel's just leaving the meeting. Okay. I think we got to the end of the agenda. Would anyone like to make any public comments? I'm not seeing any. So with that, I think I'll just say again, thank you to everyone here for coming along. Thank you to everyone who's testified in the past, who's contributed to the project. We're really at the very last phases. It's important to get it over the line and just get what we actually need out of it. And we're very, very close. So thanks, everybody. I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Jace. Much appreciated. Bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening. It's
Thank you. Good night.
7:13.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.